So yeah, this is kind of the easiest category with energy generation happening without nature positive element, but the nature positive element will kind of emerge as a byproduct, which can be intentional or unintentional. And of course, once we realize that byproduct, we can kind of start to intentionally making it. And let's look at two real life examples. This is from Gobi Desert. There's wind farms in the desert in China, Gobi Desert in China, and they noticed a peculiar phenomenon that the growth of plants that was they were denser and stronger behind the wind turbines. The picture is not very illustrative here, but just the idea that the green area behind the wind turbines, that there was specifically stronger growth of plants, which is very, very interesting. So it's kind of obvious win-win situation, right? So we're creating fossil-free energy while helping plants to grow. But we have to kind of keep in mind, if we think about nature, that it's so complex of a system. So we will be, whatever we do, it always has an impact, and this will also have some kind of negative impact. So how about the original wildlife in the area might be suffering because now we have more plants? It might be nice to us humans. We prefer green scenery and we are happy, but some other species might be not. So it's very difficult when we think about the multi-species approach. It's super complex, and we never know what the impacts actually are because it's a complex system. Another example of real life project. This is a company called Ørsted in Denmark is building offshore wind farms in Taiwan as an intended consequence, because they did realize that the foundations of offshore wind farms provide a substrate for coral reefs to grow. This picture is full of very interesting symbolism. Just a quick note that here we have the human nature divide visualized super nicely. So we have the human built concrete blocks where non-human nature is growing and even thriving better than it would otherwise be doing. And then we have the human sealed in a suit, protected from the environment, even wearing a bottle so it can breathe in an environment that it was not evolutionary meant to be. So kind of what we mentioned earlier, the divide between humans and nature, it's not artificial completely. Ecologists usually say that it's artificial, let's not talk about it, but it's not. We have a philosopher in the panel also today, so we can get into that discussion as well. But yeah, I love the symbolism here. And yeah, then let's move to more new and novel ideas, which also can use existing technology. And quick note, all these images coming are created by Midjourney AI. And what I noticed in the process was super interesting, that the AI is not simply a tool, it's a colleague. The pictures coming later are actually not my ideas. They were the ideas of the artificial intelligence. If you give a simple prompt, just like nature positive energy, I wrote that, and it created images that I had no idea. And then all of a sudden I have a new idea. I interviewed a science fiction author as part of the project, and she was like very fascinated by this. So I think, like, as a colleague, the AI was very a great partner. So yeah, here the degradable solar panels already exist in technology. They can, while they degrade, they can provide a substrate for plants. So we can even grow plants in areas that the plants wouldn't otherwise grow. Just put some seeds in the panels and they degrade, and all of a sudden we have energy and plants. Yeah, interesting. But yeah, the second category, the little bit more difficult. So we have the consequence only in the first category. Now we have the energy production as part of I mean, nature positive element as part of the energy production itself. apologies for the a bit difficult to read picture, but this is supposed to be a very advanced nuclear fusion plant. And as we are approaching the fusion power at the moment is fusing hydrogen into helium. And helium is a noble gas, so it's kind of dormant in nature. It doesn't react with anything. But what if we kind of take the approach of sun, and sun fuses helium further into oxygen, and it's quite obvious that oxygen has multiple benefits for many species on the planet. And here the interesting point is that the waste itself will be the nature positive element. So it's integrated into the energy production. Of course, have to note that reaching the temperature of sun will be challenging. Yeah, and another one, we are moving now to the direction of uncanny valley a little bit, because the picture you see here is a plant that is kind of separated from the rest of the environment. But the nature positive element is there, because then this environment can provide a more fertile environment for the plant to grow. So the plant will grow more efficiently. And this is a food for thought. Plants are so kind of energy production machines. And do we want to view nature in that way? If you think about it, plants convert sunlight into sugars. Sugars are calories. Calories are joules, and joules are kilowatt hours. So they are producing, in a sense, electricity for us. And yeah, so here we will get nature positive because the plant is kind of doing better. It's growing more efficiently. But do we want to have efficiency and nature combined? And let's move to that topic now a bit more in detail. So the third category, the most difficult to imagine, is that a technology will be embedded in nature. So you can't distinguish nature from technology anymore. So the whole concept of nature, if we think, just go back to the definition of nature, this will change it completely. Now, there is no difference between human activity and nature. And kind of the idea is that to an external observer, it would be impossible to distinguish the original real nature from this new nature. I mean, you can think about aliens landing on Earth and looking at the trees, such as this, and they wouldn't know that this is not the nature we used to know. And of course, it's difficult to say what is happening here, but just a visualization that how it could look like. You can see like wires, it's connected to the grid, right? And somehow it could be like some kind of genetic manipulation. I don't know, because this technology doesn't exist yet. But in any case, the tree will produce energy for our needs, and the tree will thrive. Around it, you can see like old forest, normal forest. But if this tree is sort of technology embedded, most likely it will be optimized and it will take over the regular forests, and then everything will look something like it. And think about the symbolism here. Tree is for many cultures, maybe all the cultures, sort of kind of a symbol of life and birth and even divine. And the question is that, would we like to have nature like this? One could argue that this is the logical step for humans to take. Because otherwise, I mean, we are destroying the planet, right? The measures we are taking, everybody says that they're not enough. We are not reaching the Paris Agreement. We are not even close. And we are still increasing fossil emissions, still, even though we've been trying to reduce them for a long time. And yeah, you could take incremental steps. Also in this conference, I already noticed that it might not be incremental steps, but it might be sort of Kuhnian micro-revolutions. And this could be a Kuhnian micro-revolution. Other, maybe even more controversial picture, that maybe the nature would be very, very different. Optimized for very few plants, and biodiversity is completely lost, but the planet is saved. the planet is saved. No more no more emissions, CO2 levels down, no problem. But the question is, do we want nature like this? That's my most important question. I want to ask you, everybody, to who would accept this nature, to raise their hand. You are the fourth audience I have given this talk to, and no, not a single person has raised their hand yet. I have raised my hand because I'm kind of technology enthusiast and a bit technology freak, which is kind of, I want to be controversial because in this conference, there's multidisciplinary people, and many of are from social sciences, and I already kind of know that this is something that will cause kind of uncanny valley feelings, that what is this guy serious? Is he really serious? I am kind of half serious, actually. I see this as a kind of step we might need to take. We might need to take this step. And micro level, here you can see how the nature will never give up. It will never be destroyed. It will grow even through the technology. So they will live together in symbiosis. One could say that technology is not symbiotic, but parasitic. but you can see it in both ways. It's possible. So it's up to the point of view that you're taking. And I would like to leave you with this thought, and we will discuss this more in the panel discussion, and just some final thoughts before that.
Thank you. So within this project, we came to the conclusion that we can imagine nature-positive technologies, and within our definition of nature-positive technologies, we already have examples of it. But the problem is the definition of nature positivity, because the problem arises when we actually think about net positivity, and what does that even mean? Do we can we only have a net positive impact after we have already done harm? Then we also the question of whether these wild ideas are possible or even wanted, since it's more about saving ourselves and not nature. But definitely there are ideas, and there are something to work with already in process. We are going to have a panel discussion afterwards about these ideas. There will be 5 of us. I will also be joining. So if you have questions, I hope you do, you can then ask the panel. Thank you.
I think we should get another round of applause to the amazing student team of today. Thank you so much. So as a small background to this session, my name is Janne Halme. I'm a university lecturer at Aalto University from the Department of Applied Physics. And there's a course called Multidisciplinary Energy Perspectives that I teach. And in that course, student teams work on various topics related to energy from different perspectives. And in this spring, there was a special theme that we had nature positive energy technology to probe into this question of energy sustainability from a slightly different point of view. And getting the invitation to propose sessions to this conference, an idea came that we should have a slightly different session where we have students on the stage. and bring this topic from the course to you, and that we have today. And then a panel discussion to continue that discussion with different perspectives as well. My co-conveners today are Professor Mika Järvinen and from Aalto University, and Hanna Paulomäki from Aalto University as well, and Karri Liikkanen. Karri has done a bachelor's thesis on this topic in connection to the project. So if you want to learn more about that, you might request that thesis from him.
Yeah, please.
So let's go to the panel discussion. I welcome our panelists, and if you could introduce yourself a bit through have a round also to our participants online. Let's see how your voice goes to the online.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. My name is Heini Kujala. I'm from the Finnish Natural History Museum, which is one of the departments at the University of Helsinki. And maybe just to give you a little bit of background about myself, I'm an ecologist. I've worked for several years now with questions about conservation planning, particularly about optimizing conservation actions, and also modeling ecological phenomena, starting from species where there occur changes in ecosystems and so on. And yeah, I guess I'm here particularly because I also one of the subjects that I work with has been biodiversity offsetting, where negative impacts from developments such as infrastructure are offset by producing gains elsewhere. So yeah, that's shortly about me. Thank you.
All right, I will then circulate this handheld microphone in the session, or maybe you can try it. Put that closer to your mouth.
Do these work?
Yeah. Okay. So it doesn't pick up it from the distance, but you have to use it like a handheld, although it's a tabletop or something like that. Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Anne Kwashi. I'm from the Turku School of Economics at the University of Turku. I work there at the subject of management and organization, but a lot of my research deals with sustainable business and biodiversity respectful business. And now I also work quite closely with the biodiversity researchers at our biodiversity unit at the University of Turku. And one of my most recent studies is on biodiversity respectful purchasing and supply chain management. So I suppose that's probably the reason why I was invited to join this panel.
Indeed, that was. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Tere Vodén. I'm a philosopher by education, and I have thought about energy sometimes as a philosopher, about the concept and what it means, and then especially about the role of fossil fuels in modern society. Nowadays, I work in the BIOS research unit, which is a small Finnish research unit concentrating on what kind of effects the ecological crisis have on Finnish society.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Mika from the Finnish Environment Institute, and I've been working on climate issues, climate policy evaluation in particular, and then also on the impact evaluation of various policies, in particular on energy. And so this topic is highly relevant, and I think it's extremely interesting that you have taken up this theme as a course, because societal transformation is, of course, one of the underlying and undercurrent issues, and then societal transformation comes very much to the heart of this nature positive efforts.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Then we have a final panelist from the student team.
Thank you. I'm Anna Niemelä. I'm just finishing up my master's from Aalto University from applied physics, and I'm going to do my master's thesis from fusion. So I'm specializing in fusion right now. And climate change just in addition, climate change and working against that was the sole reason for me to work in the energy industry. So that's why I find the topic very interesting.
All right. You heard the students' presentation on this topic, and I would like to ask panelists, what are your first impressions? What thoughts did this presentation give to you? Were there something new or something familiar from your perspective?
Right. I'll break the ice and the other ones can then just say something more sensible. First of all, I really want to congratulate the students for the work that they've done. I think it's, like Mika said, it's a rather essential topic for us as a humanity to figure out how we're going to solve the energy production questions and the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis. So it's a really, really topical question. And I particularly liked your way of grouping these sort of alternative ways of reaching net positive impacts in the energy sector, I think, or in the energy technology. I think it's very helpful for us to understand where we might be already at least on approach towards net positive solutions, but also that you have that sort of blue skies thinking, like for the big ideas, the unimaginable. And I truly agree with you that we do need to reach out to those currently perhaps unimaginable solutions, because the crises that we face are rather huge, and the current solutions are clearly not sufficient. These are just my first thoughts.
Yeah, I was really impressed by your presentation. I think it summarized many very critical things, and in particular the complexity of the topic, because this is a really complex issue. I've discussed lately with many different both biodiversity experts and business experts working in companies in different sectors about this topic. And I think trying to reach net positive impacts in any sector is really difficult. And it's really difficult to think about like what should the targets be, what types of indicators and so on. And I think in this sector in particular, the questions are really complex. And I think you were able to kind of, break the complexity of the issue and the topic down to like, many different components, like the different biodiversity impacts and so on. So I think that was very helpful, first of all. And then I think it's valuable that you also brought up the human nature divide, and whether that is a divide, and overall the human component as well of this phenomenon, because I think in trying to think about how to solve the issue, how to have impact, it's really difficult to try to solve the problems without considering also the human implications at the local level, and also many human rights implications, for example. I mean, that's another research area of mine. I look at human rights violations in supply chains, and often you actually find similar problems both related to human rights as well as biodiversity in the same places in the supply chain, for example.
Yeah, I find it's very refreshing to put the question this way, that is it possible to have nature positive energy technology? Because from the perspective of when we talk about fossil fuels and energy in general, then of course from the thermodynamic perspective, it is impossible. It's sort of conceptually impossible, because always when you use energy, then the quality of energy sort of degrades. But then, of course, when we are dealing with the Earth, it's not a closed system; it's an open system. Sort of always sort of all the time receiving surplus energy from the sun, and that creates the possibilities for having different, well, the possibility for life in the first place, and possibility for nature. So of course, humans, like any type of life, has the possibility of being a positive element in the web of life. So of course that possibility is there, and then the question becomes how can we do it now? And then the sort of for me another question that sort of popped out was in one of the, well, there it is, difficult to know. difficult to know if the whole system is positive or not. So that question, where are our skills, capacities nowadays to know about these technologies, especially because the transition we have to do is so fast. We should do it in like 15 years. We don't have generations. So what do we know about the possibilities that we have?
Okay, thanks. I think the novelty here is really that you take it to the point of this, really the idea of embedding energy technology, and even just the creating the integral part. So that is, I think, the novelty. The kind of byproduct issue is something that has been for a long time already raised and thought of. So there comes the novelty. When it comes to the novelty, I think one thing that I would challenge you to think further on is related to this, what is knowable and what the whole system really is, because especially when you talk about nature, you have both the spatial dimension, so what is positive locally, like in the case of the Gobi desert, and what is the whole Earth positive. I don't think there will ever be an answer to that question. And then the temporal dimension, which is about, I would encourage you to think, on evolution and the co-evolution of the human species with other species. So the co-evolution, what possibilities would that embed? And then again, that comes down to the temporal dimension of it. How fast do these things actually materialize? We have the short-term objectives of the Paris Agreement to reach it in a few decades, and then what you may envision is something going into hundreds, if not millennia. Thanks.
What do you think? We of course all agree that there's an urgent reason for using renewable energy technologies as fast as possible, but then as the team also pointed out that they do have negative impacts, and we have to acknowledge that as well. Do you think that both, while we are tackling the climate crisis and doing what we can, is now a time to start thinking about the post-carbon period and how we can do more nature positive energy technology, and what would that look like? That's the suggestion, I think, today in this session. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's necessary to start thinking of it. In particular, I mean, it goes to Heine's work on nature offsetting as well. But inevitably, when you do a societal transition, there will be also winners and losers. And so you need to take care of the losers in the process, whether they are representing nature or humans. And so that is why it's essential. But what it eventually will turn out to is then, as I said, the long-term evolutionary perspective that is not knowable, the end result of it.
Heini.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree. I think and I'm sure this is not a surprise to anyone, that the current situation is so dead that we really have to, we really have to, we can't sort of be satisfied with just the renewable energies, because we know that, as you showed in your presentation, there are still negative impacts that affect biodiversity negatively, and we still need to also solve those. And I think this actually sort of relates rather nicely into your question of the net positive. What does it actually mean? And in some ways, you could think that the transitioning from the fossils to the renewables could be an improvement. So it's better than the old technology, but it doesn't still maybe lift us all the way to the net positive. So we have to sort of keep on striving towards more nature-friendly solutions. And I mean, maybe because I'm a biologist and ecologist, I find this sort of idea of the technology being embedded into the nature becoming the technology that produces our energy rather intriguing and fascinating and exciting. But then at the same time, I think we also have to keep in mind the huge number of humans on this planet, and the fact that even with some of these new technologies, and this relates to the sort of uncertainty of the systems, no matter what solutions we take or which course we take, our impact is always going to be rather massive on the remainder of the ecosystem. And I think that's sort of good to be in mind. It might still be an improvement, but we probably still have such a huge impact that it might turn out being less positive than what we thought.
And about that impact, I think we are mainly talking about that impact in the same terms of harm. But here we are asking the question, could we turn that around and the impact would be a positive one? What would that mean?
I think sort of for the connecting that to the previous question about the post-fossil, I think it's important to think about the post-fossil, because what the renewables can do, they can sort of provide a safety net for the landing from the fossil era. But then the next steps have to do with agriculture, food production, forestry, these things, oceans, these things that are there already, because well, we know that agriculture is a sort of energy producer, like Karri explained, and the sort of a transition to agriculture was also an energy transition. And we also know that there are kinds of agriculture that are nature positive. Monocultures are not nature positive, but there are kinds of agriculture that can be nature positive. There can be forestry that is nature positive. There can be some sort of maybe fishery or whatever you want to call it, use of oceans that can be nature positive. And those kinds of things are the things that will be crucial for the post-fossil era.
How would you define nature positive? How would you define that? I don't know if you.
Yeah, of course, I sort of as a researcher, I know that it is difficult to define it, but also I think that when I look at it from a sort of larger perspective, as a maybe as a philosopher or as a Martian, then sort of it's not so difficult. Sort of if there are more baby salmon next year, then that's positive. If there are more baby birds next year, that's nature positive. It's not so difficult.
Yeah, the definition is, I think, a morass in which you can dive deeply and for a long time. But I think what goes to the economic side of it, the taxonomy that the EU has tried to bring forward, and one necessary element there, which is worth reflecting on, relates to the discussion, is the do no significant harm. So it's in a way that positive is defined through the avoidance of doing significant harm. Yeah. Now that of course opens another can of worms, but still it gives, I would agree that on an empirical pragmatic level, it's still possible to kind of map where we are moving and seeing that we are not in a really dead end.
Yeah, that kind of relates to also to this conference already. What I've seen this morning is kind of because I know, talking with you, that the approach with the taxonomy and the legislation is incremental, that we incrementally take steps to the better direction, and we already had the kind of joke that then we are just a little bit slower going to the destruction. But there was the new idea presented this morning that it's more like jumps. And then you could make an analog to, like, they're like Kuhnian micro revolutions. So I wanted to ask you that, do you think that's just like wishful thinking? Is the incremental approach only one that's possible?
Well, I refer to what I said earlier on the time perspective. What can be a micro revolution locally may look incremental on the whole global scale, but it's nevertheless a genuine revolution at the local level. When you really, if for example in Finland you change the forestry to something new, it is a revolution for some people in the forestry sector, and a painful revolution at that. But then on a global scale, it's a tiny incremental change which can generate. I think that's the lessons of societal transformations in general. I mean, it's not about sitting and waiting for the big bang to happen. It is really moving and gradually, and then you come to a tipping point at some level, which changes radically the situation.
Maybe sorry. Anna, go
Yeah, I just want to make a comment about the you asked about the definition of the nature positivity, and during this project, I think I ended up having a bit of a skeptical point of view to positivity, nature positivity, which is more that I personally think nature positive impacts of energy technologies can only exist when we have already done some harm. So if we take ourselves away from the equation, I don't think we could have a nature positive impact. It's reducing our impact and aiming for perfect neutrality within our surroundings. And then everything further from that, in my opinion, for example, the concepts of technology being embedded in nature, that's more about human positive energy technology. Then we are talking about a different kind of a concept, and then we have to change the concept of nature that we have kind of discussed.
Yeah, exactly. The kind of that's the challenge I was asking all of you, that would you accept this kind of nature? Because then we really come to the fundamental values, and we have to remember that it's our opinion. If humans disappeared right now, they all died, New York would be flooded in 48 hours. So New York would become inhabitable by humans in 2 days. So nature will take over. We are in constant battle against nature, right? We are not in harmony at all. We are constantly fighting. If we don't fight, we will, like, everything we build will vanish. And actually, this could be a question to Tere, because I know that you've been researching what energy means, and I think it is kind of most fundamental concept of existence. You would say that there's nothing else than energy, as Einstein said. But I would like to hear your kind of, what do you think energy is and why it is so important?
Well, putting me on the spot there. Yeah, I think it's fair to say that energy is one of those concepts that is basically a sort of like fundamental concept that can't be reduced or can't be explained by anything else. Sort of like matter or mind or energy, those things. Well, you can try to explain mind by matter or matter by mind, but then it's always a sort of like, in the end, a metaphysical question, how you want to put it. And energy is a little bit like that. We don't really know. In physics, we can sort of do stuff with energy and calculate sort of different types of energy, chemical and potential and whatever, but we don't know what energy is. Physics doesn't sort of ontologically tell us what energy is about, and well, philosophy doesn't either. It's funny because in some sense we know it from the inside. We are also energy. Whatever we are also energy. Sometimes we have low energy, sometimes high. We know what energy is from the inside, and then we have this also this like physical concept of energy. And sometimes they meet, and sometimes they don't. So it's a very difficult and very fundamental concept.
There's one thing that we are sure about energy is that we are using energy to do all the things that we do here that are impacting the planet, let's say, and the nature that we call. So it is pervasive to all our industries or our technologies, not only the energy technology itself, but the energy technology is kind of the underlying motor for these impacts and changes that we cause. And that's why we have been mainly being concerned about the negative impacts that it does to nature. And we're trying to keep the energy technology away from the nature as far as we can, to separate it from the nature. As our energy consumption increases, as our technological advancements progresses, we can think about two different ways how we can move forward. The first one is that what I mentioned, that let's try to keep it separate. Let's try to isolate that to its own circular economy and detach that from the nature or the other species. Or that we could take another approach where we would design it be in harmony with the nature. Are these the only options? These two, the only ways? Or do you see other solutions where we can continue our technological development with the other species flourishing with us?
It certainly is a challenging question, but I think I would warn against the thinking of it as a complete dualism, because that is, we have different parts of the world and different solutions that will, so if there will be a solution, it will be a diverse solution. It will not be like one fusion energy, for example. It's not conceivable that it would be the only way of producing energy. I think it may be in some advanced societies, it might be a possibility, but then in others, it won't. And that relates to the third way as well, which you in a way hinted at, that we use energy for all the activities that we have, but the energy efficiency is energy technology as much as the energy production technology. So energy efficiency, where we reduce the demand for energy and achieve more, that is part of a third way, but otherwise I see a diversity in the development, and that's the richness, and that's also the way to avoid the overall negative impacts.
But if we come back then to the idea here about the nature positivity, that it would be something where the energy technology itself would produce the positive effects towards other species, for example, and not only instead of those negative impacts being compensated by another sector. So is it reasonable, fair, and even necessary to require from the energy technology to be positive in this sense in itself, or should we just go with the compensation? Anne, do you like to?
Yeah, it's another really difficult question. Yeah, I don't maybe have an answer to that question really, but what I like about this session is that we're also trying to kind of, maybe utilize our imagination in thinking about sort of, different options and different futures, and maybe something that we haven't really discussed so much yet, or at least there are a couple of issues. Well, one is maybe kind of, circular solutions. And then there was actually an example brought up in a workshop that I attended last week on regenerative business and supply chains. And I really like this example. There was a speaker from HP in Canada, and she talked about the fact that now they're trying to develop their products with circularity in mind, and also think about alternative raw material sources. And she gave this example about using, for example, plastic bottles from the ocean in product development, and actually quite a large share of their products and the packaging, etc., now come from different types of raw materials like this. And it was quite impressive. I mean, the amount of bottles that they are collecting from the oceans in order to make these products, which was quite impressive, and also some of the targets that they had set for these types of activities were quite ambitious. So I think that's an interesting example of how you can actually take something that is currently harming nature, for example, plastic waste in oceans, and turn that into computers and laptops and other devices like this. So maybe we could kind of use our imaginations in thinking about these technologies, that okay, in addition to the more typical circular supply chains, I mean, is there something that we could come up with that would sort of in this similar fashion?
Wouldn't the ocean currents that carry the plastic waste then be part of the circular economy that you describe?
Yeah, I guess you can think about it in that way as well. Yeah, but
And that would be actually, I think, close to what we were hearing about the third category, where we are embedding technology or plastic bottles in the nature, and they are part of the system, that we circulate them, and they are co-living with the marine life, maybe attached to them, etc.
But realistically, that could be an example of the second categorization. So the integration of the positive impact into the process. So the only proper example that we had of that was the that we plan a power plant where the waste is the kind of the main reason to plan it. So we do the whole process of the energy creation, thinking about the waste. So that's kind of the same, but thinking about what fuel we are using. So in a way that could be, but then that's again up until the point when we have cleaned the oceans, and then there is really no positive impact anymore.
I would reply by sort of connecting to what Mika said to this and connected to the question of scales. I think sort of we can do energy technology on those different tiers and different scales. In some sense, there are some technologies that have to be sort of like kept separate, like you said, from nature, and somehow sort of contained. And then there are the sort of accidentally beneficial, and then on some scale we can have sort of like truly beneficial. And then scale on other sort of like the problem is that we need so much energy that these that are truly sort of nature positive don't generate enough, maybe for the current population, or let's say the current population on the current level of sort of consumption, they don't. So, but then the other question is, and it comes to this question of knowledge is on scale in another sense, because we know, for instance, that photosynthesis works on the quantum level, and the circulation of nutrition and so on in nature, when the photosynthesis happens and then there's a leaf and then it dies, then it's dispersed. That happens on the molecular and quantum level. And we don't know how to do that. We can do it on the level of plastic bottles and so on, but we don't know how to do this stuff on the level of sort of the micro level. So that's why we really don't have the technology to go to that kind of nature positive full circulation. We can do it on the crude level, but not on the sort of level that would be needed. That's sort of like the planetary level, the way that nature has designed it after millions of years, so that it can do it very precisely when it has time.
And we have developed our technology on electrical energy. So that is the form of energy that our technologies mainly run these days. And that form of electricity does not exist in nature except for lightning, which makes it quite incompatible with the other species. Imagine if we would have instead invented some biological computations, etc., that would be more compatible with the living organism.
Well, you have electric eels. So,
that's true.
Electric eels. It's not impossible to think of electricity in a.
Yeah.
But I think it goes to Teres as well. The point about really also the temporal scale, that we have a tendency to think now in the positive related to status quo, but when you're talking about your third category, it really is about millennia and evolution, and then what is positive in such a world is quite potentially different from what is positive in a current status quo perspective. So that is basically what people working on geoengineering are also struggling with, that, well, can we modify so we have a better planet overall, and how does the technology then play in? So do we optimize the incoming sun or the use of it? So there are lots of tricky questions when you take in the evolutionary millennia perspective.
It was funny to see in the one of the plenary talks this morning, this talk was trying to reject the cockpit idea that we would be able to drive this planet. But that is actually exactly what I was proposing to students in my course that we should do. We should, because we are in the steering wheel and we are driving this planet. So the question then is, how should we drive this planet when we don't know how to drive it? What should we design for? And that then comes back to the energy technology question. How should we design that as part of that design problem? How do you see that this as a design problem? Do you have a perspective on that? Or do you relate to what I mean here? From the ecological perspective, how do you design the ecological systems for better?
That's what all ecologists are trying to figure out. Well, it's a really hard question, obviously. I mean, ecology and nature is so endlessly complex that it's rather difficult to predict sometimes how things will evolve if you change something in the system. Obviously, we have lots of tools to try to do that, but it is a complex thing. I do, maybe I'm repeating myself a little bit, but I do sort of like a lot. I mean, I find this very attractive, this idea of embedding the energy design into the nature, because I mean, if you think about it, who has figured out how to do nature positive energy? It's nature. But as we said, as we agreed here, we don't really have the technology that nature has.
And we do use that. We do use that for agriculture, etc.
Yeah.
Even for medicine, but not in energy technology, unfortunately.
Exactly. So is that something that we nevertheless still should be striving for? Or is it just sci-fi? So that's a good question.
Right.
We are. I would like at this point to maybe ask if somebody had something to say about this. Of course, you can go, but sorry, I didn't look at you. But I would like to. Yeah,
I was just going to continue from that. That the thing that I worry about there is the time scale. Again, that sort of the solutions that we know that do no significant harm or that are nature positive, they have evolved in time over rather long periods of time through trial and error. And that's sort of like to design something like that from just a sort of from a greenfield project. It's very difficult.
If I may just quickly, and I just want to sort of, I guess, chime in as well what Mika said, that especially on the short time period, I think what is perhaps even more crucial is just reducing the energy use, figuring out ways to reduce it, reduce everything effectively that we consume. And I think that's something that the society is now slowly starting to understand, that we do have to do it. They're starting to accept that we do have to do it. And there are even ways emerging to do it. But I think that is something that still needs to be scaled up quite a lot.
Karri,
yeah.
you had a thought.
Yeah, sorry about interrupting. I was writing my notes, but maybe audience has also questions. At least we tried to be provocative, and we have one there in the that row. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Anne. I am an engineer. Work at Strathmore University in Kenya on electrification and electricity access. So my first question is the obvious one for my end: positivity to whom? Right? Because the current system is very extractive. You extract minerals from the global south, extract minerals from the global south, ship them to China or whatever, and then the global north gets it from there, and everyone sings kumbaya on this side. Yeah, we've done some very nice solar installation on a rooftop, when in the that solar installation on this end was extracted from somewhere. I say that as a country that's also importing a lot of solar photovoltaic systems. We're in the sun belt, so solar makes a lot of sense for us. It's there every day in the year. But yeah, we are also part of so the other thing is consumption reduction. I think in terms of consumption reduction, again, who is doing the consumption reduction? Because there's a lot of consumption that needs to happen in the global south for us right now, our biggest enemy is poverty, right? So we're trying our best to do poverty alleviation, even energy itself is for the sake of reduction of poverty. So there's, I'm assuming, quite an amount of consumption that needs to happen. And we see this play out a lot in this global forum discussions where a country comes and says, you know, the global north, you need to reduce your emissions or you need to mitigate against your future emissions. But then China and India will tell you, look, we need to emit to actually become, because right now, as it stands, renewable energy technologies are not at the point where a lot of like steel manufacturing can be done, so to say. Yeah, so the other thing is, in terms of thinking about technologies that are embedded in nature, I think sometimes when he was saying that, I think I was thinking there are indigenous communities that were doing a lot of stuff back in the day, like they were building bridges using roots of trees. I watched a couple of videos, I spent a bit of time on YouTube watching a bunch of stuff like that. And there's a lot of indigenous knowledge in different places. Not quite sure if in Kenya because of different issues there, but yeah, there's a lot to learn from indigenous communities around the world. And then I think the last one is in terms of the planet. I do not normally think of we're not saving the planet, we're saving human civilization. If we died today, like you said, New York will be flooded in 48 hours and the world will continue without us. So is human civilization something we want to save? If it is, then we have to make sure that that human civilization we're saving includes the global south. Yeah.
Add on to her first question.
Sorry,
and at what cost? I would just want to understand, just in addition to her question, maybe if that's something we've thought about.
Yeah, there was quite a lot of questions. Maybe the panelists can kind of answer some of them with kind of what would resonate with you the most, or what kind of thoughts you have.
Thank you for those points, first of all. I was just going to, before this question, say that if we are being honest, we are talking about saving ourselves. So the whole nature positive thing, of course, we appreciate nature, but we are talking about saving ourselves, not the nature. The nature will survive. You made a lot of good points. I think I will make some notes about the previous ones and let them continue.
I might just, yeah, first of all, I think really, really important that you raised that question. I think we all agree that there is a huge question of fairness when it comes to solving all these crises that have been mainly created by the global north instead of the global south. So these are really relevant questions. Something that I, just from my perspective, wanted to bring into this discussion is that, which is no solution to many of the questions that you posed, but was the importance of also the local actions. Because, you know, a lot of the energy transitioning currently happening is because of climate change. It's not because of biodiversity, as we have learned also here today. But a lot of the actions that we would do would be locally beneficial to biodiversity. We have to remember that climate is global in many ways. Whatever we do here affects the global climate, but the effects on biodiversity are typically only local. So even in the systems where the technology, the energy, the climate mitigation is actually part of a system where, you know, material and energy is transferred between different parts of the world, if you still locally can make solutions that are nature positive, then that is something that stays locally. Just wanted to bring that aspect into the question, into the discussion.
Yeah, in a reasonable world, of course, energy consumption would be first reduced in those places where it is used the most and where it's easiest and least does the least harm to reduce it. So, but that's a political question, like we know. So let's fight.
But I would also come back to the issue of energy efficiency, because that is obviously the trajectory that we are following, that when the fairness discussion goes in, that you can increase the well-being by, in most cases so far, we have increased energy, but then it's really crucial how much energy is needed for producing the well-being. And that's why I think it's equally important for the global south to also engage, and for the global north to provide the assistance for the energy transition in the global south.
Just an additional note, I think this is my opinion, but I do think that we have created the wealth that we have here, but also the destruction of the planet that we have done on the expense of the global south. So of course it's a simplifying answer, but the cost, I think it should come from the expense of global north. I think it's of course simplification, but in a way it is that simple. And that's why this is such a multidisciplinary problem, because we were discussing these things quite a lot. Like when we were contemplating the idea of can we have positivity, even net positivity, it doesn't just, of course, come solely on the energy perspective. We have 50 million victims of modern slavery right now. And even if one of those people is used in any process of the energy creation, whether it's minerals or production, then that is already a negative impact. So of course, as I said, very multidisciplinary, and the action is very much needed in politics, in business, in everything. That's why we need a systemical change. It's just not about innovations and technology. That would be fun. We could just have startups and create something, but it's really about a change of the whole system.
Yeah, I think we had you earlier, I think. You can put the microphone there.
Hello, I'm Kaisa-Leena from the Regional Council of Kymenlaakso. And because of that, I have a sort of a more down-to-earth point of angle to this. I think this is a very interesting and needed discussion what we're having here, but I would ask the panelists to sort of tie these ideas into what's happening now here. For example, in Finland, what we're doing now is we're building huge solar panel farms. We're cutting down forests or building them on fields. We're also building huge grid infrastructure to transport the renewable energy from the west coast to all over Finland, and that's having a huge impact on biodiversity. And at the same time, there would be sort of like solutions that are not as disruptive as the ones we're using now. For example, I've heard that for solar panel fields, sometimes they put gravel there just to make it more easier to maintain it, whereas you could also have perennial grass and then have, well, some sort of biodiversity and maybe sort of carbon binding. So we're actually not asking those who are building those, we are not asking them to be as nature positive or nature respective as they could be. And what could we do to change that? Thank you.
Well, I could maybe just quickly comment that I think that's an excellent point of view, and I've been thinking about that also during this session, that I think it's not just a matter of, should we have these, technologies, but also how, and I think there's a lot that could be done to kind of, reduce the many harms that these have on nature. And I think this also links to the previous questions raised, for example, about indigenous groups and sort of local knowledge. And I think and I was thinking in listening to comments by the other panelists that I think it's not only sort of a global versus south issue, but also an issue of sort of maybe trying to gain a better understanding of local knowledge, local viewpoints. There could be viewpoints, for example, of indigenous groups, but also local community members in other areas as well. And And I think currently, what we often see is that, we kind of disregard local knowledge, opinions of the local people, the harms that, these projects have locally. So definitely, I think in the future, we should find less harmful ways of trying to use these nature positive and nature respectful technologies. And
yeah, just a quick one on that one. I think it's a very essential point, and we do in principle have the tools. We do have the impact assessment requirements, which appropriately employed would reveal the less harmful or the positive opportunities. Now that comes back to then the competence of those who are doing the assessments, who do, and all the authorities who approve the plans and so on, to really raise these very concrete points locally. Like Hayden was saying, that it's often then you can identify that, well, what can you do here and there. I was spent a week in cycling in Bavaria, and there you can see the different levels of evolution in solar panels, that some of them were flat on the ground, almost covering, like you were saying, and then the more modern ones creating more space underneath for allowing also other uses. So there are fairly simple things even in those concrete, but it needs a realization, and that goes back to the challenge of the educational system to produce people who are aware and ready to answer or question those planning issues.
Yeah, so Mika Jalas from Aalto University. Thanks for a very inspiring presentation, and also for the student work there. My question is, or comment is, more conceptual, and I really first would like to applaud the previous question of putting this into practice. So then returning conceptual issues sounds a bit, boring. But a few points that I was struggling. So first of all, I think that the whole notion of renewable energy should be maybe not used in this context, because photosynthesis based on, or energy systems that are based on photosynthesis, we have had them for a long time. Horses have been fed with food and they produce energy and so on and so forth. So I think that the real question here is that our technologies are moving away from, energy technologies are moving away from photosynthesis, and that then creates this kind of territorial opportunity that we can leave more space for nature, which still depends on photosynthesis as a kind of basic structure. So talking about something else than renewable energy would be, I think, promising for this type of discussion. And then relating to that, technology-wise, I think it's quite interesting to think that how photovoltaics are, performing against photosynthesis. That if photovoltaics is, I guess it's more efficient in turning light into energy, that has quite big consequences for the imaginaries that you have been presenting. And maybe the final comment is then thinking about the coexistence of energy systems, other species and human species. So some kind of a word for cohabitation, thinking about, for example, the city as a human-built structure that it houses some, or is suitable for some species, but of course very weak in biodiversity in general, would be a useful metaphor. So I saw basically in the trees and in the artificial intelligence images a lot of kind of urban development where nature is part of and growing on a kind of human substrate. Those kind of thoughts, but very nice panel. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm Shakib Selaji from Pan-African University in Tlemcen, Algeria. First of all, I would like to thank the panel for this very interesting dialogue. I would like to make a comment about energy. We are not about energy production, but energy transformation. We are transforming energy from one state to another state. So this transformation will provide entropy regarding the second law of thermodynamics, and entropy is related to disorder. So in any case, we are contributing to developing disorder in our universe. So even if we are using renewable energy, for example, PV system, if we are using PV system to reduce CO2 emissions, in order to produce this PV system, we should deploy heat, a huge amount of heat. So we are in other way contributing to CO2 emissions, and if we consider the footprint of this system, we should be aware that in some case the CO2 impact is more than expected. So my opinion, if we are looking to reduce at the maximum this entropy, the cost will be very high. That is the first point. The second point, I'm pretty sure we are talking about heaven, about a paradise. In my sense, it's an utopic situation. Thank you.
Yeah, we are running out of time, unfortunately.
Okay, just
a bit.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd like to add is to what she said, and with respect to the greenness of the energy technologies. I'm normally very careful when ascribing what is nature. Let me say, in this, if you say green now, change it to nature positive. I'm very careful with green because of carbon and energy payback time. That is the amount of energy you use to produce this thing versus the amount of payback it'll give you over the lifetime, and the same thing for carbon. And I think that should be like at the back of the mind, which is that even solar itself, like you said, and like everyone has mentioned, might have all that background stuff. So what exactly are we saying is nature positive? Are we considering the life cycle, right? Are we considering the entire value chain, supply chains and stuff like that? So it's super crucial. And like you said, also, you can continue with this, string as many things as possible, but there's some, you really have to figure out which ones are core. And I would request from a global perspective, from someone who's coming from Kenya, that some of these metrics which impact us actually come out clearly in this.
Thank you so much. Yeah, indeed, we are running out of time, or we have time. We have time, but only a little. This topic of education, learning, teaching was brought up. I'd like to give a minute to Professor Mika Järvinen. You have been teaching. You are teaching energy technologies. What's your perspective on this topic from what you have experienced in the classrooms?
Oh, thank you. Yes, that's true, and congratulations for the students group. You really proud how you have dealt this topic, and I have 2 pages of comments, so we have only half a minute, so I keep them on my own and with press. So yes, you are right. I'm teaching normally like technical stuff, but then with students in the classroom. I think that the topics that activate the student the most are the ones related to sustainability or biodiversity issues. Those we talk, as you might remember, and it's really nice to see that and notice that the younger students, they are really interested on these things, and you realize that it's not about just the technical issues, and you are really worried about what is happening here. And I will use a little bit time. Very nice discussion from the panel also, and I wrote here that we humans, we have raised us above all other species, but also above other human beings. Rich, we are using poor people and that is not a bit odd system. And yesterday, this is my last comment. I was yesterday evening in a dinner meeting, and there was similar work from students in Edel's sustainability design of sustainability course. And student proposed there, they were discussing biodiversity and how, for example, campus could look like. And they were discussing that, okay, the ecologists are aware of biodiversity corridors, but they turned it the other way around, discussing what are we to decide this, how should there be corridors for humans? And I think we are together with nature, but this is, I think, very well put from the students that, okay, do we have the right to, in a way, put the nature into corridors? Should we be in there? I don't think that's the solution, but it makes us think that who are we to say how to do it? But thanks a lot for the students. Really, really nice work, and very happy to be here. And this is something we can't read from the books. Definitely, I learned a lot. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mika. Thank you, Hanna, Paulomäki, also for convening and also helping me to imagine this session in the early stages. Thank you for the student team. Thank you for the panelists. It has been an amazing discussion moment, and I hope the discussion continues during the conference. I'm here to talk to you if you want to ask something, if you want to propose